Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show.
Good morning and welcome back to the Desert Sanctuary. We're glad that you're here. Laura is not quite here yet. She may arrive at any time, but we're talking today to Rick Pidcock, who's a writer for Baptist News Global, and I won't go through his whole bio. He's becoming quite well known in deconstruction fields and places like that. We call it the desert. He might refer to it as the Wild West of spiritual nomads. And here for a very important recap of his article in Baptist News Global that came out a couple of days ago. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. I just want to make sure that we kind of set some stuff. If you are have been through trauma and you've experienced religious trauma, some of this may be triggering. I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about. We only have about a little bit of notes here, not very many notes, but just be aware that some stuff can be triggering to you, and take care of yourself first. It's more important that you regulate yourself, and then take care of yourself, and then you can come back to the podcast later if you want. But we wanted to interview Rick today. We had inclinations that something like this might happen several months ago, and we'll talk about that. But welcome, Rick. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Was it 2 days ago that your article came out?
I believe so.
Probably Monday. Yeah. And so we, first of all, and it concerns Dr. Laura Anderson, who's one of the probably best known coaches, therapists, around the subject of religious trauma, and has apparently crossed some lines, and we want to talk about that. But I wanted to know from you, Rick, and I'll answer also, but what's your motivation for this? What goes on in Rick's head when you think, I want to report on this? What are you thinking about when you think about that?
Yeah, so a lot of my writing is really motivated by analyzing the power dynamics that are at play in our politics and religious world today, and showing how these usually men use theology to hurt people and to oppress people, and my goal for that is really to help people on the underside of power learn to recognize some of those patterns and how they're being harmed, and then to be able to liberate themselves from the grip of these usually men. In this story, it's a woman, which is a bit strange, but yeah, it's for liberation, that these people on the underside of power can love themselves well by taking care of themselves and pursuing wholeness under the grip of those who would harm them.
Mm. And you do a very good job. You've reported on things such as, Turning Point and some of the evangelical men's stuff, and reported all across the board on some things like that. I think you're doing a fantastic job. Your reporting is fact based, and I wonder, you being a former worship leader and me being a former pastor, we have kind of that same thing of, we left evangelical Christianity because of the damage and the harm it did. We had theological differences, yes, but also we were harmed by it, and we knew other people that were, by these power differentials and the things you're talking about. What we don't want, if we're going to explore something new, and people tend to form groups and tend to want to organize, even before they're better. And then we don't want this to be the same as what we came from. And a lot of times, as we said often with the new evangelicals, it's kind of like the same old evangelicals who are more tolerant of queer people and things like that. They're a little more progressive, but then we see the same mistakes being made. And it's for me, it's kind of like we want to raise a red flag. We don't want to do you've already been kind of counterattacked for this article,
Hmm.
and people call it a hit piece or something like that. It's really not that at all, right?
Yeah, I've never had somebody on the underside of power accuse me of writing a hit piece. It's always those who use theology to justify their power over others or their,
Yeah.
degree or whatever. And that's sort of like it's interesting because in this deconstruction world, people often will say that okay, once you deconstruct, you have to reconstruct. And it's interesting because I like to use the image of the Tower of Babel, for example, because you have the Tower of Babel, which is like these walls of power that keep people in these static locations,
Hmm.
and where they're currently at, and it doesn't allow for evolution. It doesn't allow for, it keeps you afraid of the outsiders. And so deconstruction to me is like taking down that tower. So then you at that point you're like you are in the desert or the wilderness or whatever metaphor you want to use. And a lot of people they'll say, okay, well then it's not enough to deconstruct, you have to reconstruct. And for me, I kind of have a issue with that language because I still think in tower languages and I'm not really interested in building another tower. I'm more interested in changing metaphors to what does it mean to actually not have walls and floors between you and your neighbors
Yeah.
and to be in the wilderness together, and which opens up a whole new world of metaphors. And so when it comes to this particular story, I think that a lot of times people get so um, caught into building another tower, whether that's a brand or a podcast or a blog or a book or video, whatever, that they can end up without having gone through the embodied healing that is necessary. They may not recognize the way they're constructing another tower with walls between people and floors above people.
Yeah. Power structures. It's so good and so important. We don't necessarily get a car from building a better wagon, right? And when you said tower, I was my picture in my brain was the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Hmm.
We don't rebuild that, right, with a different paint job. Healing is so important, and former worship leaders, former pastors, people like that who have had a little bit of that power and that leadership experience start into deconstruction real quickly. We find a little relief, a little healing, some answers, and we want to jump back into a cottage industry or something that can quickly, if it's successful, become an organization.
Hmm.
So it becomes an organization. Then there are power differentials, like you've been alluding to, um, and we may not have gotten any better. We may not have, like you mentioned, healed ourselves first before we try to heal other people.
Yeah, and I felt that like my deconstruction started with actually it was because of, and I've covered this on your podcast in the past, I believe, but it was from a worship school where I started to learn about the importance of self-awareness. But like once I started changing some of my theology, I felt that desire to build another brand early in the process. Like I remember I started a blog called Worship Overflow. I started a thing called Provoke Wonder, and I claimed it was, a collaboration of artists. And so like I was feeling that embodied desire to build another brand right off the bat. And but the more I went into through the healing process, I started to recognize some issues with some of that. And I don't want to like down anybody who has a brand or something that isn't just their
Right,
name,
right.
but like for me, I think it's important to recognize that that impulse was there right out of leaving conservative evangelicalism to start another
Yeah,
organization.
yeah. And we get, a lot of us have that mindset of changing the world, of making a mark, and some of that was influenced by religion and encouraged by religion. We got to save the world, but we can really only act locally. And sometimes online we can get there faster, right? But faster is not always good. And
Hmm.
we definitely carry, at least 1 in 3 carry some trauma, and with pastors and worship leaders and such, probably a lot more, a lot higher percentage. But we really need to stress and encourage one another in all these endeavors to get better before you try to help someone else. Put on your own oxygen mask and so on, and all the metaphors that go along with that.
Hmm.
I wanted to, if it's okay, we can give everybody kind of a brief summary of, I call it phase 1 and phase 2 that led up to, this is phase 3 now of this saga, this journey that involves the New Evangelicals, the Theology Beer Camp, uh, Tim Whitaker and the New Evangelicals, and various other characters along the way, including the subject today, Dr. Laura Anderson. In 2023, Tony Jones was platformed for the beer camp. I think that happens in August most of the times. Um, and the issue was that he had in the past, in 2009, supposedly pushed his wife. There's a police report. Um, but it was really about more than that, because in 2015 he attacked David Hayward, the naked pastor, because because David had dared to speak out and mention, it wasn't even about the incident, right? It wasn't about him pushing his wife. It was about, the way he commented on Mark Driscoll or something. And so this emergent church, or emerging church, whatever the right name is there, um, kind of guerrillas came out of the woodwork, and were just laying waste to everybody to try to protect him. So that was kind of where it was at. That the people that were attending that beer camp, the women, or ones that were in the New Evangelicals group, which was highly publicizing the event and heavily involved in it, they just said, we want somebody to stand up and say, this is not a good idea. You know, whatever he did in the past, is sort of the past, but the participants know this, and they know that about it, and that's going to be traumatizing to them. Let's stand up for the women. Someone say something. Maybe Tony could voluntarily step down and so on, but they didn't listen. A lot of the speakers and people that we knew, that we contacted, said things like, well, I've suffered trauma too. And, and they just didn't address it. And we found out further back in the history, there were several other progressive leaders that just decided not to challenge Tony Jones. So that was where we were in 2023. And they went on with the beer camp, and he was there, and someone didn't show up. And I think he was even more on stage than we initially thought. But then last year, 2024, seemed to be going the same way. But you have all the facts. I'm going kind of from memory here, but last year in 2024, the beer camp was scheduled to go as normal, and some of the same speakers, most of the same speakers, and so on. But about that time, the Grace Report came out on the New Evangelicals. The board had um, decided that there had been another something happened, and they wanted to report on it. They wanted to contact Grace, which is a godly response to adverse Christian experiences. Is that right?
Abuse in the Christian
Abuse in the
environment.
Christian environments, yeah. Led by Pete Singer, who has since passed away, uh, which we were sorry to hear. Formed by Boz, who is uh, Billy Graham's grandson. But that kind of intersects a little bit with today's topic, because when the board of the New Evangelicals was trying to negotiate with Tim Whitaker, because in the initial incident, he did a scathing video and they pulled it down. But the beer camp went on and everything happened as normal. In 2024, there was another incident where Dr. Laura Anderson was a mediator between the New Evangelicals and Tim Whitaker, their pseudo leader kind of guy. And they found several conflicts of interest during that Grace report, because, and again, I'm expecting you to correct me or make sure this what I'm saying is right. Laura was a mediator between them. They found several conflicts of interest with that. More people are upset. Um, Tim's publisher cancels his book deal. You covered that story, which all of that kind of came out the following spring in the Grace report. And the Grace report was kind of not really released, but then kind of forced to be released. And there were a couple of victims that felt like they had been traumatized by the New Evangelicals group, and specifically Tim Whitaker. So about that time, as I understand it, women were starting to contact you about Dr. Laura Anderson.
Yes.
And I appreciate your approach. I know I was bugging you, trying to find out more information, but more people upset, and the women were telling you stories about their experiences with Dr. Laura. It took a while for you to gather the information, publish, check with legal, and wait for these ethic charges to come to light. And so when these ethics charges, uh, when one of them was finalized, I guess, or anyway, we can clear that up later.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, 1 to 2 days ago, you published all this timeline and facts and things that happened, and mostly centering around the stories those women told you about Dr. Laura Anderson. The ongoing saga of the New Evangelicals continues. It's when the largest deconstruction group and the most well-known deconstruction trauma coach meet, that we start seeing some problems. And problems are identified. They're really not addressed well, other than the Grace report. It was a very thorough 90 something page document with interviews and facts and so on. And all of your reporting along the way has helped clarify. So that's why we want you here, because 2 days ago you reported on Dr. Laura Anderson and her involvement in all this, and what the women have told you. So am I on track there? And can we pick up from there?
Yeah, that's a pretty good overview. And I think what I've kind of seen, I mean, there are a lot of parallels, but like kind of a basic through line in a lot of this is in the Tony Jones situation, you have his ex-wife. In the Tim Whitaker and the New Evangelicals situation, you have the contractors, the female contractors. And now in the Laura Anderson situation, we've got these women that have talked to me. And like in every single story, the the content creator at the top is wanting to put on an event, create videos, run an organization, put out memes and stuff. And it's like, and they've got to keep on their schedule. And then, but then there's a significant number of people who were invested in their organization that are saying, I'm hurting here.
Yeah,
And you're just now posting about like, something Donald Trump said. Like it doesn't make any sense.
right,
Even if I agree with a lot of their critiques of Trump, it's like is right now the time for content creation.
right. Now, and they're so you're looking back at Mark Driscoll and the bodies under the bus and all that malarkey.
Hmm.
Yet some of these more popular um, content creators are creating content, yet in some ways they're doing the very same things they're criticizing, right? And
Hmm.
so um, people raise their hands, people speak up, and it's really, really difficult because a lot of probably the women you talk to had experienced trauma within the evangelical church. We're escaping it. We want the new evangelicals, the new thing, the better stuff, the trauma informed coach. Um, but sometimes they're finding that narcissism still exists, that power corrupts, that we got big too fast, we didn't heal, and we're experiencing some of the same situations, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's scary when your tower falls and you're seeing the night sky and you've got a storm coming, and it's like it makes sense to want to go run into a new tower. But like you're gonna very likely find in that new tower the same thing going on.
Right.
Walls and floors.
Yeah. So the new developments you reported very well in the spring, um, about the Grace report and all the things that happened from that. And then these women began to call you. What are they saying? I mean, you summarized kind of, but what are some of the things they're saying about all these situations?
So there was a lot of the chatter was obviously about like Tim Whitaker and the New Evangelicals at the time. It was about, the chatter everyone was paying attention to was how Tim, after my first piece came out, Tim called me 14 minutes later and was pretty upset. And, so that's obviously a storyline. And then like the New Evangelicals, are they really doing behind the scenes what they're saying they're doing on video for everyone to see? Like, that was a storyline. But so that's where most of the talk was. But there were these odd details in the report. Um, the mediator, who um she had a friendship with Tim, and they again tried to downplay that,
Mhm.
but like there was
Also
a
hoping for business from him, right?
yeah, yeah, and yeah, and then and then the person who uh was the victim of Whitaker's angry driving incident, she's going into a mediation situation where it should be a safe place to like talk to a third party, get both of your experiences out on the table and talk through it. But like the third party mediator is joking and laughing with Tim behind the scenes. They're producing content together that very same day.
Yeah.
Like that made her feel very unsafe. And so
And
there's
gives
that.
it gives him even more power
Yeah. And
over
so
the
like
situation.
yeah, and so the Grace report pointed that out and said that was a conflict of interest. And Tim Whitaker and the New Evangelicals agreed. They said, yeah, that really wasn't the best idea. I don't have the exact quote on me, but
Right.
essentially they agreed it was a conflict of interest.
Yeah, it's in the
Um,
report.
yeah, yeah. But then there was a footnote in the report. Um, it's a 90-page report, so it's like
Mhm.
it's hard enough to read the pages, let alone the footnotes. But there was
Yeah.
this odd footnote where Grace said that Laura Anderson basically contacted them and was like, "Hey, we have a common, essentially customer base. We could work together and refer people to one another."
Mm,
And which would obviously be a money-making opportunity. And Grace pointed out in the report that was a conflict of interest
right,
because, someone who's a mediator and who's part of the investigation should not be trying to partner with the company who's doing the investigation.
right.
So, I started hearing like there were some people on social media that were like, "Has anybody like looked into this mediator situation?"
Mhm.
And like that was kind of pretty weird. Um and then I noticed like in the report, oh wait, that's Laura Anderson. Like she's a really big deal in the deconstruction world.
Mhm.
Um how did she not recognize either of these conflicts of interest? Um
Mhm.
and and so I started, looking around. I found some podcasts that she was on where she was talking about boundaries and how she talked about, like, fundamentalists that we left, like they believe in boundaries, and it's very rules based. And if you have a relationship based on these boundaries, then you're gonna have a rules based relationship. And we've left fundamentalism, so we're not that. That's very black and white thinking. We're not that anymore. And it
Mhm.
was this very, like, it's a reaction to fundamentalism, but then what she's essentially doing is not caring about people's consent,
Right.
and real safe boundaries that people may need to have in their lives. Um, and so then I started talking to some of the people that were involved in finding and
These
hearing,
are
oh,
all women, right? All women.
yeah, yeah, they're all women, yeah. And so just started with a couple people that were involved in the New Evangelical story, and they're like they're like, oh, I've heard something about this. You should talk to this person. And then, oh, yeah, that actually happened here. You should talk to this person. And it kind of went from there. And so then, like, within a week or so, there were basically, like, there were seven women who had different levels of experiences. They're not like all the dramatic stories that
Right.
were in the piece. But you've got everything from contract and financial situations with employees and interns to people who had interactions with her, where they came away feeling like boundaries were blurred.
And all the stories agreed, right? Pretty much
Yeah,
across the board. And even though they didn't all know each other or whatever, you're still seeing threads, right?
yeah. There was no collaboration going on between the women. They were independent, and some of them didn't even know who the other people were. I didn't even tell them. I didn't name names. I worked with each one individually, and only discussed other names with everybody's permission, and through that found out, oh, some of these women don't even know each other, and they're saying the same thing, and they're providing documentation that are all showing very similar patterns.
Mm. Yeah, that's amazing to me. And it's amazing when you start to talk to survivors and so much of you've emphasized power differentials. And to me that's patriarchy, but it's also narcissistic leaders. So it seems like the common themes among them and what I got from from some of those discussions and those quotes and so on was that it seems like, and this is just an observation and a judgment, right, that Dr. Laura in general seemed to ignore um, those things that she knew, she seemed to know from other sources was wrong. Um, she would make excuses, like I mean, it's kind of like the typical response, the Darbo response, but she kind of lashed out at people, but she also knew some things weren't quite right, but she said things like, well, all therapists, you know, have dings on their record like that because of whatever. And it is hard to be a coach and a therapist, right? But
Hmm.
she seemed to have a disregard for any guardrails, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was the a similar thing, like, that was throughout. It was, one was minimizing what she was responsible for and minimizing the women's experiences, and then also blaming them. And so, like, when I
Mhm.
asked for, so she was charged with four violations by the AAMFT, and then they found her in violation of two of those. And so I asked her for a statement, like, what is your response to being found guilty of these two violations? And if you read the statement which I put in the article, like, she starts off by basically saying, I didn't exploit the person. The findings were that I didn't exploit this person. And, the things that I did, like, they're not uncommon. So, like, just however invested you are into her, the basic reality of this response is it's lightening what happened. Like it's saying it's really maybe yeah, it was I shouldn't have done, but it's not that big of a deal. It happens. And then the
And the
second
women are saying the opposite of that. It is a big
yeah,
deal, and it
yeah.
really did affect me, and it really hurt me. And she's saying,
And I do feel exploited.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And she's saying, well, you should be better by now. She's making reference
Yeah.
to statements like that quite a bit.
Yeah, and then the second thing was the abuse or sorry, was the blame shifting. She said like, "Oh, this was actually the the complainant's idea. They came up with it."
Yeah,
And so it's like in all of these stories, like I had access to their emails. I see the person confronting Laura, I see Laura's response. Like pages and pages and pages of this, and this is consistently the pattern. Oh, I'm shocked that you would have experienced it that way. That's
gaslighting.
not what
Yeah.
happened. And why would you accuse me of doing something like that? Says to me something about the way you view our friendship. Or do you even care about me? Type stuff. It's like
Mhm.
all of a sudden you like feel
Wow.
guilty for even bringing this up.
Sure. Yeah, it's gaslighting 101, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Patriarchal control. Even though she's not a man. Um, so there's some future things coming, right, in this saga. I mean, this is not over with the ethics things. Is there's more, right?
Yeah, so there's a second case actually. The first case was finalized, but there's a whole second case coming in the fall. And so it's like on one hand, this isn't just the word of some nameless women against the word of an established authority in the field that they're trying to take her down. I've seen a lot of people say that these women and Rick are like not friends to the ex-evangelical movement, and they're trying to take down the ex-evangelical movement by sowing distrust in this authority, this well-established authority, which is funny.
Yeah.
But like yeah, so but it's not just that. You know, it's that the AAMFT uh found her in violation. They found enough
A-
evidence to charge her with more than that.
AAMFT is
It's basically like it's like a organization that licenses and oversees therapists. It's the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. And so they have a code of ethics that therapists have to live by. And in that code of ethics, there were four violations that they charged her with. And then there was from what I understand, there was she was found guilty of some number of those. I'm not sure how many exactly, but then there was an appeals process, and then in the end they had her guilty of two. So I don't know if she was originally guilty with all four and she was able to like get it down to two, or if it was just two the whole time. I'm not sure about that. Um, but what I'm trying to say is like these are actual licensing organizations, and Grace, they're very respected. Like these are observations that were the things these women are telling me behind the scenes and the things I'm seeing in the letters and the documents, they're all lining with what Grace brought up, and Grace didn't know about these women. And then we have the AAMFT finding her guilty of two violations, and they've got a whole nother case coming in the fall.
yeah,
So there is a there that
yeah.
needs to be, and again, like if I wouldn't have written this piece, like nobody would have ever known about any of this.
Hmm.
And so like you have all of these people going, she's on like 75 different deconstruction related podcasts. You have all these people referencing religious trauma survivors to her. There is so much harm that could be done. And I couldn't live with that reality of I know these things, I'm just not going to write the piece. Like that
Right.
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate your courage and ability to say, this is wrong. And hopefully we can have whistleblowers, quote unquote, in the desert, in the Wild West here. We can have some accountability. I don't think I have to be the accountability partner for everybody I choose to be an account. You know what I mean? But
Hmm.
we're going down the wrong path again. Somebody's got to wave the flag and sound the alarm and say we got to stop long enough to get better and do some things different, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what else do you want to say about that history, that timeline? Have we covered most of what you covered in your article? The article is called "Licensing Agency Finds Religious Trauma Coach in Violation of Code of Ethics," and it is by Baptist News Global, July 28th, 2025. Um, and that's real easy to find, and it's real helpful. If you want to know the facts, if you just want to have a reaction to whatever's happening, then probably should think about that a little longer, not speak up. But if you want to go back and find the facts, then start with Rick's article and go from there, and maybe look up the ones from before, from this spring, that talk about the Grace Report, and maybe the initial stuff that some of us have done with the Tony Jones and the Theology Beer Camp. Go back and look at the facts and then come back with a comment. I'd encourage you to read the article, though. It's worth reading. Anything else you want to fill in there before we go to another question?
Um, I think that there need that I think that thing about the accountability is important because like we have um when you're in this place of like religious coaching, trauma coaching, um it could be like we kind of mentioned the Wild West. I've heard a number of people use that metaphor.
Mhm.
And um and and so like even as somebody like the AAMFT, like they found Laura guilty of these two violations, but again, there was no public announcement. If I hadn't written this piece, nobody would have known, and she would have just gone on like normal. And so like there's got to be people need to be aware if there's something that severe. People need to be aware of what they're getting themselves into when they go to a religious trauma coach, and and so that's kind of where I see the role of journalism in this is providing some level of that. I've got to be careful because like I can't do a entire piece on everybody's issue in the whole world,
Mhm.
Otherwise
Yeah,
it'll be never ending.
right.
But like that doesn't mean that the work can't be done. I've got to kind of manage my own spiritual health, so to speak, too, and working through all that.
Yeah. And you're going to take the risk if you speak up of being mischaracterized, right? And um, but it's gotta happen that people kind of take a stand and say, we're not telling you that you can't do anything ever again, but what about just taking a step back and getting better and stopping the train long enough, quit running over people like Mark Driscoll likes to do, and let's be different. Let's let's say, hey, Rick, if I'm your friend, you're messing up. You went too far on this. Can you think about that or reevaluate that? Um, that's the best thing we could do for people. But so we're still talking with Rick Pidcock of Baptist News Global and a personal friend of mine. He, I say we're friends, but we've met in person once, and I respect his work. We talk occasionally about whatever. But I'm glad that he's here today to talk about the article "Licensing Agency Finds Religious Trauma Coach in Violation of Code of Ethics." It's part of the ongoing New Evangelical saga, but talking about the therapist and coach, um, Dr. Laura Anderson. So, continuing on, can you give us a little more clarification, maybe on the violations and upcoming violations that are going to be tried soon? Um, give us a little more detail, maybe, or whatever you
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, so like that's been one of the questions I've noticed people having is what exactly were the violations
Mhm.
in the AAMFT found her you know guilty of, and and so and I'll admit like up front that was a bit of a weakness in the article. Um and one of the reasons why is because it's hard to it's kind of hard to describe. And so it's not like as clear cut as a pastor abused a child, like that's you can understand what happened there.
Right.
Whereas in this one, it involves financial contracts, it involves industry standards, and if you're not in that industry, it can feel like you're getting into the weeds, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean that something wrong wasn't done because obviously, like, that's kind of a big deal to have two violations as a therapist. And other therapists who I've talked with have said, like, oh, this is a big deal. And she's treating it like it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
And they would be horrified if they had these violations against them on their record.
Yeah.
So, so basically, like, my understanding of it was that there was the person the complainant who issued the complaint was at the same time a practitioner at her company as well as an academic intern.
Mhm.
And so that led to issues because interns have required hours, you're not allowed to be paid, whereas practitioners can be paid.
Mhm.
And so, if you're seeing clients and you've got two of these different basic relationships going on, there's going to be issues that come up. And some of the allegations involved intentionally reworded contracts, charging the Anderson charging the complainant for clients that the complainant wasn't getting paid for. And so you can kind of get the sense that, okay, now we're getting into like the weeds here, and this might be hard for a lot of people to understand. And so basically, like they initially found her with they charged her with four violations, and like I said, in the end, they said she was guilty of two after all the appeals process and everything. And the reason why I so what I did in my handling of the pieces, I just quoted like what were the things that they said she violated.
Mhm.
4.1 and 4.6 were the substandards,
Mhm.
if I remember right. What were the standards that she violated? And then I quoted her response. So that's led to some confusion from people who don't know the industry. Like, well, what was the dual relationship? What was the thing? And so, I wish I could have made a more clear case as to what all those things were and how it all went down. But I also needed to be careful because, like, there's risks in me speaking to specifics about people's contracts and getting them wrong, And I thought, like, and even then, like, that may be kind of confusing to readers. But people understand the idea of there were charges and there were violations, so that was kind of the for me what was important to bring in that part of the story was here's this organization who holds these people accountable. They charged her and they said this is, you're guilty of this and this is your penalty basically.
And to be clear, it's not, you mentioned this before, and I want to stress it again. It wasn't people, quote unquote, doing hit pieces. It wasn't um, someone's opinion out on the internet. It was a licensing agency for her industry. So
Hmm.
they, and they convicted her, they charged her um, and found her guilty of two of them. Right. And
Yeah.
the new charges, the new case that's coming up, are those situations similar or sort of the same or totally different?
Yeah, so the case coming up in the fall is it's later on in the piece there's this interpersonal dynamics in the workplace section. And there's the part where she says to somebody, I believe you have dissociative identity disorder, not otherwise specified, that is brought on from trauma, a survival strategy. So in the world of therapy, you're not allowed to diagnose people who aren't your clients, especially against with if they haven't consented to that. And
Mm-hmm.
so when she says, I believe you have this specific disorder, um, that's going to obviously feel to the person who has not consented quite shocking, which I get into in the piece. And so
Yeah.
that that's a very serious breach of ethics that's going to need to be
Mm-hmm.
explored.
And there might have been more than one of those instances, or it might have been a pattern.
Yeah, I'm assuming like if I had this number of people come to me within a few weeks of the Tim Whitaker story, just from Anderson being, named as the mediator, I'm assuming there's more
Mm-hmm.
that could come out. I'm assuming there are probably people who have read my piece that are like, "Oh wow, I had a similar experience too." And because I don't want to. It feels assumptive to me to think that I unearthed the entirety of the of the web within a couple weeks of the first and second articles.
I want to point out something. It's just my opinion. Um, our, our immediate reaction, I think, back in the evangelical world and sometimes in narcissistic situations and power differentials and so on, we tend to think, well, these women are just trying to get attention, or these women are, um, trying to promote their own thing or whatever. And I want to tell you, in talking to a lot of these people from the early incident, the phase 1 incident that we mentioned earlier, the phase 2, the survivors and women that I've talked to, just kind of on the outline of all this. I'm not right in the middle, but they're so, oh God, I want to just say fucked up by
Hmm.
all this. They're having trouble navigating life because of these things happening to them. And for someone to minimize it, it's horrible. And then when you're the the when the this is my opinion, the trauma expert, as she brands herself, should understand that
Hmm.
and shouldn't be inflicting that. It's a very serious thing, and it doesn't just keep that person from telling on you. It it sometimes destroys that person
Hmm.
emotionally, spiritually, even physically. It's going to have physical impact on these people. To where one of the witnesses in the Grace report is still struggling. Uh, it was extremely devastating what happened to her, and to have it minimized makes it twice as bad. And she has to come out in public, to some degree with it, or admit it to somebody, show you the emails, all those things. We got to do it better. it,
Yeah, and to speak to that a little bit too, like for one thing, like the women in these situations, like they had a good thing going, you know. In the New Evangelicals the situation, these women had a fun job creating content, getting paid for it, like
Having some success.
yeah, having
Yeah.
great success. Like why would you throw that away to make up a story to get anonymously mentioned in a news piece for Baptist News Global?
Right.
Like
Right.
that makes
Right.
that makes no sense.
I know.
Or like, you finally imagine you finally are going to make you've made the decision to talk to a therapist or a religious trauma coach. You're finally going through these stages of healing, of these wounds you've held your whole life, and and then you're just going to toss all that away in order to bring the person down who's trying to help you, like, and again, anonymously in an
Mm.
article, like that makes literally zero sense that they
Yeah.
would do that. And the strategy, especially when you think about it, like, I'll get made fun of for being a tabloid journalist, Laura Anderson went on Threads and called me a journalist in quotation marks, and made fun of me last night.
Mm.
So, I'll take some of that mocking, but like, at least like my name is still there attached to an article, whereas these women, like, they're anonymous and I'm not giving up their names.
Mhm.
And so like they're just um seeing this public mocking of them as, being overreactive, emotional, whining, you know,
Mhm.
women.
Mhm.
And I mean that like in a derogatory, way that the
Yeah.
patriarchs do.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they've got to,
They're
they've
hysterical, right?
yeah, yeah.
Right.
And so like um yeah, so some of them like that can be very difficult to deal with. And they
Extremely. Yeah.
yeah, and so I think there's no motive for them to do that. They're being honest, especially when the patterns in the private interactions are all lining up and when the organization's Grace and the AAMFT are independently coming up to the same conclusions too.
Yeah. I would assume it's not as bad in some ways as it used to be, where there was larger groups with emergent church and so on that could attack, but you still get some of that. And what I've been hearing lately, and it's kind of hard to deal with in a way, is that, we kind of get to the point, if we don't speak up, then it's like, who can we trust? It's like, you know, we're having the same issues in some ways, as in some ways, most things are better because of deconstruction, but we're finding some of the same patterns and so on. It's getting to people, isn't it? They're
Hmm.
kind of like, who do you trust? And can you expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, and I've seen that some in the response to this piece. They're like, I spent my Audible money on this. I spent some of my money on her book. Like, oh, I can't even talk to religious trauma people that have even left the faith. Because
Mm-hmm.
like that's where it's helpful to people to talk sometimes to people who have completely left Christianity, because then you feel like they're not trying to get you back into a program or an institution. It feels safer. And that makes sense. But they're like, is there even a safe place there?
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that's a hard situation for people to come to grips with is yeah.
Yeah, because new evangelicals was seen as that.
Hmm.
You mentioned that before. It was going good. It was a safe place. Well, then, okay, we as the new evangelicals, why don't we stand up to this incident with the beer can?
Hmm.
And then that should have been a defining moment where we stood up for women and survivors and the new evangelicals and Tim Whitaker and all of us and speakers and writers and podcasters and reporters, and we all stood up and said, let's don't do that to women anymore. You know,
Yeah.
it's so discouraging when the ball gets dropped, and then
It's
it
like
gets dropped again.
yeah, it's like the mega church that says they're a safe place for you to ask all of your questions, but then when you go to their statement of faith, they still believe in inerrancy. They still believe in, you know, uh penal substitutionary atonement, eternal conscious torment. They don't really accept LGBTQ people. Like, it's like, okay, well, it's only a safe place as long as you still end up with the same answers.
Yeah, as long as you
And
get your stuff. Yeah,
yeah, and like I think in some of this world, it's like it's only a safe place as long as we're still the content creators on our platform.
right. Then I don't have to give up any of my stuff. Right. And
Yeah.
I made the comment the other day on social media that once religion gets the power that it seeks, it tends to become more violent. And I hate to use that word, but it tends to become more aggressive to keep what it has and to preserve it for the future.
Hmm.
So that's just been a pattern. That was Hitler's pattern. As soon as he was a Christian, gained power, and then to keep that power, you resort to violence or fear and control and all those things to keep what you have. And then power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we find ourselves in those cycles throughout history. I wanted to really get a chance to ask you, and this is not in your role as a reporter, but as a human being out here in the desert, in the Wild West, in the, however you describe it. What's the way forward? What do we need to do better?
I think we should probably lean into that fear of, is this a safe place, until we're okay with accepting the fact that it's not, because the wilderness is not a safe place. The desert is not a safe place.
Mm,
And I'll hear people will often say, "I'm a safe space for you," and I don't ever say that. Like, I don't want to assume that I'm safe for somebody else. And people will get concerned that I write for Baptist News Global because it has Baptist in the name.
mhm,
I don't respond by saying, "Oh no, but it's a safe Baptist place."
mhm.
Um, I think people need to. I think we need to be okay with people's intuition, even if it calls into question a sensitive spot in our ego. And if somebody is concerned about me being a graduate of Bob Jones University or writing for a Baptist news organization, I would rather them live with that intuition.
Suspicion, a little bit of suspicion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And looking out for themselves and caring for themselves,
Hmm.
than act defensively and say, "No, I'm a safe place. I've deconstructed enough, and here's my credentials,"
Hmm.
because then I'm creating that tower again. So I
Hmm.
think one way forward is to be okay with that. And then also, I think another way forward is for us to learn to recognize how these power dynamics work. If somebody puts out a statement of a couple paragraphs, don't feel so overwhelmed like you've got to do all this investigation to figure out what all in there is true and what all's not true. You can recognize what they're doing in the statement. It's quite simple. They're minimizing the abuse and they're blaming the victim.
Hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that's the
Absolutely.
pattern.
And really, are there safe spaces, or is it only safe people? Or can we collectively be safe, or do we just need to be doing everything we can uh, to be a person that just emanates and gives off safeness? We don't respond, and the only way I know to do that is for us to individually get better
Hmm.
and heal, because a lot of our missteps are when we're dysregulated, when we're in crisis mode, when we're activated, when we're hyper vigilant, all those things, and that all that's survival mode. It's not the best way forward, right?
Hmm.
So a pastor, an ex-pastor, someone that wants to change the world, to use a general term, get better. For my way forward would be that they should get better and keep getting better and act locally. There's only one or two, celebrity type of groups, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
That's going to be famous, and there's only one David Hayward. There's, you know what I mean? And the
Hmm.
rest sometimes want to be there and, sacrifice integrity and sacrifice what they do to people by trying to climb that ladder and being loyal to the narcissist that has the power and so on. And you see that right in our current administration. We see it all over the place in evangelicalism, and we don't want to see it as we move forward.
Yeah.
And I like that you shy away a little bit from reconstruction, because maybe we need to keep deconstructing and
Hmm.
not building towers of
Yeah.
patriarchy and control and fear and all those things we came from. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Pursue wholeness and pursue in yourself and in the relationships that you have. And the nature of whole people in whole relationships is that, wholeness tends to give birth to more wholeness. And I think that's a better place to be.
Yeah. Can you just let people know where all your stuff is? You're a writer at Baptist News Global. That's your main gig. You're a stay-at-home father with about 5 kids or so, right? Um, uh,
Yeah.
Tell us about your other stuff.
Yeah, so they can find me anywhere on social media. At Rick Pidcock is my handle, basically anywhere. And then my website, rickpidcock.com. And then I'm also on Substack if they want to subscribe, rickpidcock.substack.com. And that's nice because, especially with everything going on today with Trump's attacks on the media, and all of the algorithms, at play, it's nice to have that Substack subscription because then, you get it right in your inbox and you're not relying on, organizations being shut
Facebook
down
and so on. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
algorithms putting it in front of you,
Right.
So
Yeah. That's good. I want to reiterate that your stuff is good, and I get the sense that you work very hard to make it authentic and real and correct, and you spend the time, and so much of what you're documenting will be useful, I hope, in the near future. As we say, what's working and what's happened, and we have a history there. The emergent church was documented in the shadows there, and there's records of what happened, but you gotta dig a little harder to find them when people have that information. But it's golden that history's recorded, so we hopefully don't repeat it. And that's the main focus, I assume, of your articles. We don't want to repeat history, right? Let's do better.
Yep.
Thanks for being on, Rick. I want to remind the listeners today to keep. I just feel like, and it encourage people just to keep going, and concentrate on your progress, concentrate on your well-being and getting better. And when you have a chance to walk beside someone else and help them along in the journey, do that. Do it with integrity. Don't ever make popularity or making money or anything like that the main goal. The goal should be for all of us together to somehow get better, as an individual and then as a group. And hopefully that eventually changes the world. It might not make us popular, might not make us money, but hopefully we'll accomplish the right things. We encourage you, as always, to be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.